Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second week of this class. This class is called Taharot, and so we're focusing on holy people, places, and things. So the question or the focus here tonight will be how to remain pure in speech. We're speaking about Lashon Hara. How to remain pure in your marriage and in your synagogue, developing a vibrant prayer life, engaging with holy items like challah, mezuzot, tzitzit, and tithe.
Yeah, so some of these things we'll see how much we get to. So last week we talked about a year, in the life of the Messianic life, all the holidays and how to prepare for them and Shabbat and all those kinds of things. So if you missed that class, we will happily put that online so you can catch that later. Anyways, and the resources that we were mentioning in there, which will be a real benefit to you. So we're moving now into the second kind of phase. So some of the things we mentioned from the first one will kind of carry on into this one a little bit, as well as into the third one. So we are now kind of discussing holy people, places, and things, and that's kind of where we're going today. So we're going to begin with holy people, and the most important thing when we're discussing about how to be holy as a nation, as a messianic community, as well as people within our own homes, the most important thing is going to be, number one, your speech. It is the most difficult thing for anyone to really keep up with, and that's why it's, in the Amidah that you say, 3 times a day or whatever, multiple times a day. Jewish people say constantly, and there's always that prayer at the end, which is guard my speech. And I find that that's so really important, because after you've said all your prayers to God, after you've said all your petitions and all the things that you desire for him to be able to do in your life, this is the last thing that's kind of right at the end of that. And I always find that to be impactful spiritually, because when you think about all the prayers that you've done to the Lord, the next thing that always happens is the devil always comes to try to steal your joy, steal your peace, steal your whatever. And he knows that life or death is in the power of the tongue. And so it's almost always the last thing. So I think there's a lot of wisdom to the fact that that happens to be the last thing that is spoken in the Amidah after that section. So we're going to be talking about 3 things in regards to holy speech: lying lips, Lashon Hara, evil speech, and then vulgarity. So we're really not going to talk about lying lips, because who doesn't agree that you shouldn't lie, right? Seems like pretty basic. So we're going to skip over that and go to evil speech. So Lashon Hara is any form of communication that may harm someone else emotionally, financially, physically, or damage their reputation. As it says, I think it's in Proverbs, that the best thing that a man can have is a good reputation. So
a good name.
A good name, yeah. And so that's really important. So there's a book called the Chofetz Chaim, and it is a treatise basically all about how to have proper speech within Judaism. And it goes through extensive detail on this specific thing, how to not speak Lashon Hara, evil speech. And so the rabbi who wrote it, he is affectionately called the Chofetz Chaim in honor of his work. And so some of these principles are really going to be derived from his pretty famous treatise. So the severity of Lashon Hara is so awesome and so severe that, according to the Chofetz Chaim, violating the prohibition of Lashon Hara entails transgressing at least 6 negative biblical commandments and at least 2 positive commandments. So that's a lot of commandments. That's 8 commandments right there, just in saying that one thing that's not kosher. So the Gemara, which is rabbinic commentary on the Mishnah, which is commentary on the on the legal aspects of the Torah and the laws in the Bible. Anyways, tells us that just like studying Torah is equal to all other mitzvahs, like all of them combined, that's how important it is to study the Word of God, because without doing that, you won't know how to do anything, right? So too is the sin of Lashon Hara equal to all other sins. That's a pretty big statement there. That's a pretty weighty comment to say that, if you don't speak the right things, if you're not holy in what you speak, it's as though you violated the entire Torah. That's pretty severe. So the Gemara in Sota 42a says that people who speak Lashon Hara are included among those who are not permitted to greet the Shekhinah or the presence of God. So when as believers, our goal is to invite the presence of God into our lives, into our homes, into our synagogues. And so when you see that as a very clear example of what can bar your way from your relationship to God, it puts it into like, this is a high priority of what we really need to be mindful about as believers. So Rabbi Yirmiyah Bar Abba says 4 classes of people will not greet the divine presence: the class of cynics, the class of flatterers, the class of liars, and the class of slanderers. The proof for this statement is as follows. The class of cynics is, as it is written, he draws his hand from cynics, which is Hosea 7:5, i.e. God does not want to be in their presence. The class of flatterers, as it is written, that a flatterer cannot come before him, Job 13:16. The class of liars, it is written, he who speaks falsehood shall not dwell before my eyes, Psalms 101:7. The class of slanderers will not greet the divine presence, that is written, for you are not a God who has pleasure in wickedness, evil shall not sojourn with you, Psalms 5:5, which means you, the Lord, are righteous, and evil shall not dwell with you in your dwelling place. Evil here is referring to slanderers, as the rabbis say, as it is evident from the continuation of the chapter, which states in Psalms 5:10, for there is no sincerity in their mouth, their inward parts is a yawning gulf, their throat is an open tomb, they make smooth their tongue. So we're talking about evil speech. We're not just talking about saying something that's, negative towards someone. Part of evil speech also includes excessive flattery. And that may seem like a strange thing, but when you think about it logically, if someone is constantly praising, let's just say a restaurant you're going to go to, and they're like, this is the best restaurant, I've ever been to this restaurant, this is wonderful, whatever. Then you go there and they, for whatever reason, have an off night or something. Your expectation is so high because of what someone else has excessively flattered or excessively exaggerated or whatever the case may be for flair or whatever, that it is inflated that thing in your mind so much so that your expectations were higher and then you were disappointed. So even that can make a person be diminished in someone else's eyes. So that seems like a strange one, but it is true.
And
so,
it does happen a lot.
It does happen a lot, yeah. So here's a few guidelines, just, aside from the one I just mentioned, regarding evil speech. So one is, it's forbidden to speak about anything negative about a fellow Jew or another person, even if it's true. So this has nothing to do with whether or not what you're saying about someone is true or not. It has to do whether or not you should be saying it. So this prohibition is called Lashon Hara, as I mentioned. So when communicating something false about another person, an even more severe sin is committed. So it's even worse, of course, if you're saying something that isn't true. But no, it's not okay to say something true that is negative about someone else. So also the Torah commandment is don't be a talebearer in your nation. So the word that's referring to talebearer literally means peddler, and refers to one who carries stories or peddles from place to place, from one person to another, such and such said this, such and such did that, whatever. So even if it's true and there's no degradation, this speech violates a negative commandment right there in the Torah to not be a talebearer. It is a severe sin and it causes the souls of Jews to be killed. So how does this relate to murder? Okay, so the rabbis go through a whole explanation that, again, because life or death is in the tongue, that when you speak something evil against someone, even if it is true, that you in effect are murdering that person. That's how severe what you say about other people can be. So as believers, we have been given authority, and we have to recognize how deep that authority goes. And I was thinking about this the other day, that if we really understood the level of authority that God has given to us, we would not even remotely be the people we are now. Even, harkening back to the story with Cornelius, if we even remotely understood authority, when Yeshua says, no greater faith have I found in Israel. So if we even had Roman centurion, if we even had, Roman centurion, if we even had a remote understanding of what that meant, you know, it would be life changing for us. So a lot of that, I think, has to come back to what we speak, and I'll explain a little bit more of that from the Torah in a minute. So it's equally forbidden whether one volunteered or if one had asked for the information, where one will come to say Lashon Hara. So, you know, you're not supposed to bait someone, you know, to kind of give you this information. One should not listen to even one's own father or rabbi to say Lashon Hara, you know. So it's like, it doesn't matter who's saying it to you, it doesn't make it okay.
And even with that, there's a way of dealing with that sort of situation in a manner of respect. And so the way that is taught is, like, say, for example, a father is doing such and such with regard to Lashon Hara, and so we would think, okay, well, the son should reprove the father. No, not exactly. The son is taught that it should be posed as a question. Father, doesn't the Torah say this? So that you're honoring your father, and at the same time, you're bringing that correction from the Torah.
Right. You're allowing him to teach you when in truth, you're the one who's teaching. But you pose it in such a way that, as my husband said, that honor isn't lost.
Right.
So even if taking upon oneself not to speak Lashon Hara will cause one to sustain financial loss, such as the loss of one's job, etc., nonetheless is forbidden to speak Lashon Hara. So even if it's going to cost you your job, you know, you should not say something that is evil against someone else. Even if it will cause one embarrassment not to say Lashon Hara, one may not say Lashon Hara. So like if you're in a crowd, you know, and everybody's like talking trash about this one person, you know how it goes, everybody gangs up on one person, whatever. And so even if it will cause you embarrassment or make you not fit in for some reason, whatever, that you should not then go ahead to do so regardless. So needless to say, such a heroic moral stance is rewarded exponentially in line with the rabbinic dictum. Reward is in the portion to the effort, right? So even if, you know, you're coming against a lot of opposition, it's even more a reward to you if you're able to sustain and remain in holiness. So this prohibition includes any communication that is verbalized, even written, or simply implied in a silent manner. So even if you say, you know, when you know, everybody knows who you're talking about, but you're like, you know who did yada yada, like that still applies because everybody knows what you're talking about, okay? So anyway, the bottom line is there's no loopholes here. There's no loopholes. So even if saying Lashon Hara also degrades oneself, it is still prohibited. So this is important, especially for women, because women have a tendency to be, denigrating to themselves, you know. Oh, I'm not pretty and this and that, whatever. This is Lashon Hara. You're speaking evil against yourself. You know what I'm saying? So you're not even supposed to do that. So there is a biblical prohibition of believing any form of Lashon Hara, even if the subject of the discussion is present and doesn't deny what's being said about him. So that's kind of interesting, you know, when you think like, oh, is it true? Is it not true? Well, okay, it might be true of the other person. The other person might not even deny that they've done X, Y, Z. But even there, your heart should always be to see the good in the other person. How amazing is that?
Yeah.
That, you know, that even if they're not even denying that they've done it, still choose to believe the good. That's, you know, when we think about Yeshua, you know, with Judas, you know, those things come to mind. Like, he knows the heart. He knows what's going to happen. And still, he chooses to believe, you know, even whatever remnant of good there was. So, the one who accepts Lashon Hara is worse than the one who even says it. So you entertaining it, you receiving that, you listening to that is even worse than the person who's saying it, because sometimes someone is saying it out of anger or this or that, and it's not necessarily, malicious per se, but they're venting to you because they have a need to vent. But you, on the other hand, don't necessarily have a reason to be listening to that garbage, and you're entertaining those things, right?
You as the audience are giving him the stage.
Right, exactly. And so you're ultimately, in another sense, putting a stumbling block in front of your brother, right? So even if Lashon Hara is said for constructive purposes, okay, like, hey, get yourself together, whatever you did, X, Y, Z, I saw you eat that pepperoni pizza, okay, whatever, that's a bad example, but you know what I mean? the listener may not be wholehearted with what's being said, and even if it's said for constructive purposes, you should take precautions in dealing with someone in a negative manner. I know that in leadership, there's this important principle that you praise publicly and correct privately. And sometimes, we joke with people, but even in joking, you're not supposed to say those kind of things. I'm a very jokey person, so sometimes those things come out, and in all fairness, listen, I'm not perfect, and I'm certainly, have made all these mistakes, so I'm not denying any of them. But as believers, we really have to be very mindful about what we say. So that's just kind of a brief introduction to, in more detail, of Lashon Hara and how to keep your way pure, and to really check your motives, check your heart when speaking to someone else. And I remember I was talking with Pastor Essifer one time, and he happened to be discussing something with someone else who was insulting Jacob, if I remember correctly, because Jacob in the Bible, he lies or whatever, to get his inheritance and all of that. And so somebody was saying something in a kind of denigrating manner about Jacob, and it really upset Pastor Essifer. And he says, "Listen, these are our patriarchs. These are our fathers. Like, why are you saying this in this way? Like, those stories are there, yes, to help give us lessons of life that we need to learn. But even if someone is deceased, it is not okay to speak Lashon Hara. And when you think about the fact that, yes, they may be dead from this world, but they're alive in another. And, we'll give account." So, anyways. So now we're going to come to vulgarity in speech. So the rabbis state that God himself even avoids using crude language in the Torah. Rather than using the term impure, rather the Torah states in Genesis 7:8, that which is not pure, and in Deuteronomy 23:11, who is not pure. So even in the Torah, it avoids actually saying someone is impure, just saying they are not pure, which you might think is a distinction without, what's this phrase? Distinction without distinction, whatever. Like
in the Hebrew, it's lo tahor instead of tameh, right? Tameh meaning impure, but lo tahor is not pure. Right. So in the translation, you kind of miss the difference in the terms a little bit.
Oh, okay, because it's a different word. Yeah.
It's a different word.
Yeah. So anyway, so the rabbis are basically saying, even in this, God is avoiding even saying something bad, right? So the rabbis go through this whole quote here, and it says, likewise, a Braita teaching was taught in the school of Rabbi Yishmael. A person should always converse euphemistically, as one finds in the following verses. The first, and whichever saddle that the Zav, or the impure person, man, rides upon shall be ritually impure. This is Leviticus 15:9, which discusses the impurity imparted by an impure person to an object on which he sits, calls this action riding. And the verse, Leviticus 15:22, talking about a woman, and anyone who touches anything on which she sat, which discusses the parallel ritual impurity of a woman, Azava calls the action sitting. So when it's talking about the man, it says he's riding. And when it talks about the woman, the same action, it says she's sitting. So why, the rabbis are discussing, why is there a difference in the way that it's being referred to? Right. So since riding is slightly demeaning for a woman, as it involves an immodest splaying of the legs, the verse avoids the term riding and opts to convey the more modest image of sitting.
Side saddle.
Well,
theoretically.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think she's necessarily side saddling, but it's saying that intentionally to avoid you conjuring up the image in your mind of what a woman looks like when she's riding. Right. Is the point, okay? So it says in another verse, Job 15:5, and you choose the language of the crafty, meaning that one should be clever when speaking and avoid inappropriate phrases. And it says in another verse, my words shall utter the uprightness of my heart, and that which my lips know, they shall speak sincerely.
Wow.
This is Job 33:3. So even in the case of just talking casually, in normal action of a woman, you need to speak in a cryptic manner just to avoid bringing inappropriate thoughts or images. And we're going to talk next week about sniut, which is involved in modesty. Okay, so we'll put a pin in that. But anyways, so when we think about, just what goes on with the music and the TV and the movies and, all the stuff that's not just cryptically, saying things to be suggestive. They're out and out in your face, these days. There's no hiding anything today. So Proverbs 10:19 through 21 says, "Where there is much talking, there is no lack of transgressing. But he who curbs his tongue shows sense." You think about, the monks, right? That take a vow of silence or whatever. Sometimes you think, hey, that's crazy. But in another sense, you're like, well, they're probably avoiding about a whole host of sinning. You know what I'm saying? So in doing so and being able to learn how to bridle their tongue, how deeply impactful that is. And if we as people, we always talk about fasting from food or fasting from this and that. What if we fasted from talking?
That is an actual practice.
Yeah.
It's called ta'anit dibur, fasting from speech.
Right. And how important that would be if we did that on a fairly regular basis. Point. So anyways, the tongue of a righteous man is choice silver, but the mind of the wicked is of little worth. So, amen, right? Amen. So when we think about the value a man can bring, or a woman, whatever, can bring to a community, how destructive your words can be. The lips of the righteous sustain many, but fools die for lack of sense. So when we ask the Lord for sustenance, when we ask the Lord to bless our communities, and and we're like, well, what's happening that's not happening? Maybe some of it is coming back to what you have used your words for that hasn't been appropriate. So rabbis also say, due to the sin of vulgar speech, troubles abound, and harsh decrees are renewed, and the youth among the enemies of Israel. A euphemistic reference to Israel die, and orphans and widows cry out for help and are not answered. As it is stated, this is Isaiah 9:16, "Therefore the Lord shall have no joy in their young men, neither shall he have compassion on the fatherless and the widows, for everyone is ungodly and an evildoer, and every mouth speaks wantonness. For all this in his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still." So the rabbis explain, what is the meaning of this phrase, but his hand is stretched out still? So Rabbi Hanan Bar Rava says, everybody knows why the bride enters the wedding canopy. There is no secret revealed. Nevertheless, anyone who speaks vulgarly about it, even if they, on high, sealed for him a decree of 70 years of good fortune, they will be reversed it to a bad fortune because of this sin. It's pretty severe. Okay? And Rabbi Bar Shelia said that Rav Hizda said, anyone who speaks vulgarly, they deepen Gehenna, which is hell. They deepen hell for him, as it is stated, the mouth that speaks perversely is a deep pit. He that is abhorred of the Lord shall fall therein. This is Proverbs 22:14. So Gehenna is deepened for the one who speaks vulgarly. So that's, that's pretty clear reference for us as believers as well. So Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, everyone who hears vulgar speech and is silent is punished, as it is stated, he that is abhorred of the Lord shall fall therein, even if he himself does not speak at all. So even if you're listening again, to those kinds of things that are inappropriate, and this is especially, I think, true for men, because, shop talk, whatever, locker room talk, whatever you want to say.
You have to just say something or walk away. That's...
Yeah. And listen, and just like before, there's repercussions when you say something.
Yeah.
Then you're like the pansy, the whatever, the sissy pants, there's all this, right, that comes afterwards. There's a reality to the back blow of whatever happens. But in truth, we have to be right before the Lord, because it takes years off of your life when you're not, right? In reality. So that's just what we're going to say about speech there for a moment. So now we're going to kind of shift to, unless you want to say anything about speech? No?
No.
Okay.
No.
So we're going to shift now. I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction. So now that we've talked about, being holy people in the sense of our speech, Now we're going to kind of move to holy people in the sense of our relationship maritally, specifically in regards to nida, laws of separation and menstruation in marriage, which are extremely important. But I'm going to give you an introduction here regarding the mitzvot of women, because we're going to talk about a couple of things. Last week we talked about candle lighting and some of the laws regarding that. And so we're going to talk about the other two things here today. So I'm just going to give this intro. So women typically perform 3 specific mitzvahs in general, laws, whatever commandments, in addition to all the general ones, not lying, not stealing, blah, 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 those kind of things. But 3 specific ones that generally are kind of reserved for women, even though other people can do them. So one is lighting the candles on Shabbat, which is welcoming the light of life into your home, into your family environment. That's considered kind of a woman's thing. Secondarily is separating the challah, so dividing the dough when you cook, when you specifically make loaves for Shabbat or whatever. We'll come talk about that in more detail later. And Taharot mishpacha, which is family purity related to laws of menstruation and how to keep your family pure during this time. So the rabbis discuss in Mishnah Ketubot 7:4 situations in which a woman can be divorced without receiving the monetary settlement laid out in the ketubah, which is the marriage contract in Judaism. It says, these women are divorced without the monetary settlement in their ketubah, a woman who transgresses the Dat Moshe or Yehudit, the laws of Moses and the laws of the Jewish women. And what is the laws of Moses? If she feeds him untithed food, has relations when she's in nida, and does not pitch off the challah, separate the dough, and makes vows she does not fulfill. Okay. So all of these transgressions involved causing the husband to sin unknowingly. So if the woman is preparing food in her home that was not tithed on, she's causing her husband to sin before God. If she's lying with him when she's in a state of
marital relations in the state of nida.
If she's lying with him, when she's impure, whatever, she's causing him to sin because maybe he doesn't know that, the lights are out, whatever, he's not paying attention to what's going on in her body, right? All those kinds of things. She's causing him to sin inadvertently, and he's going to answer to God for that. So all those particular laws are not just individual, they're relational. And so it's a man's responsibility to ask to ensure that all those things have been done correctly, just to make sure. So in Mishnah, and the rabbis say in Shabbat 2:7, it says that before Shabbat, a man should say this to his household calmly. Did you take the tithes? Did you make the eruv? Did you light the candle? So he's supposed to ask his wife, he's supposed to ask his family, make sure these things were done in an appropriate manner. The sages cautioned husbands to act kindly and calmly and reminded them that too much pressure can have the opposite effect of the one desired. Instead of diligent mitzvah observance, others may take shortcuts to please the man of the house. So, if you didn't, light the candles on time and, now it's already Shabbat, and you're going to be like, let me light the candles right now so he doesn't know that I didn't do them before and violate the Sabbath. So, those kind of things. So at the same time, they stress the wife's responsibility, which is not only to maintain trust in the home between her and her husband, but also to the Almighty. Transgressing commandments a woman commits in private have repercussions in other intimate moments between her and her Creator. So, there's a very clear shared responsibility. So now we're going to come to talking specifically about marital purity and what that means. And I want to say that this is a very, very in-depth section of laws in regards to the Torah. It is extremely important. I'll explain why in a minute. So there are quite a few laws, quite a few rabbinic observances in regards to this that can feel very overwhelming. So I'm just going to give you kind of the basics here, but I would like to at some point have a more in-depth class specifically regarding this, because it is so very important, and it's something that's unfortunately very, very neglected in the Messianic world and altogether forgotten in the Christian world, and it really is very important. So according to the Torah, a man is forbidden from having sexual relations with his wife while she is in nida, that is, a menstruating woman. The law of nida is the only law of ritual purity that continues to be observed today. At one time, a large portion of Jewish law revolved around questions of ritual purity and impurity, mostly regarding the priests and what went on in the temple, right? Because there's no temple, so a lot of this is all lost, right? So till they revive again. All of the other laws had significance in the time of the temple, but are not applicable now. So this is the only law that's really still continuing. So here's some of the biblical examples of this. So Leviticus 18:19 says, "Do not come near a woman during her menstrual period of impurity to uncover her nakedness." Leviticus 18:29 says, "Any who do any of these abhorrent things, such persons shall be cut off from their people." We'll come back to that in a minute. "You shall put the Israelites on guard against their impurity, lest they die through their impurity by defiling my tabernacle, which is among them. Such is the ritual concerning the one who has a discharge, concerning him who has an emission of semen and becomes impure thereby, and concerning her whose condition is that of menstrual separation, and concerning anyone, male or female, who has a discharge, and concerning a man who lies with an impure woman." So, when the Lord is like, how are they going to die through their impurity? Right? He's making it very clear how important this is. So coming back to the previous verse, where it says he's going to be cut off from his people. The rabbi is going through a very deep discussion of what it means to be karet, what it means to be cut off in this Hebrew word. And there's just a few basic interpretations of this. One is that you are going to have a premature death. Two, not just you're going to have a premature death, but your lineage is ultimately going to die off. And three, even the most severe interpretation of this is saying not just will you be cut off from this world, but from the Olam Haba, the world to come. That is extremely severe. So when you put that in perspective to say, having sexual relations with my wife while she is impure could potentially bar me from being able to enter heaven, or whatever you want to term it, right? The world to come. That's a very extreme, severe interpretation of this. So in any case, whether it be a shortening of your life, damage to even your children, your sons, your lineage, whatever, none of those things are in any way small potatoes, okay? So this is so very severely looked after in Judaism that rabbis literally devote their whole lives in main study to this being part of their specialty, dealing with menstruation of women. I mean, that's, when you put that in perspective, that's pretty, deep. But anyways, so a woman who enters the halakhic status of being a nida when she experiences uterine bleeding not due to trauma, okay? So you can have uterine bleeding for a whole host of things. Hormonal changes, you come off the pill, you're entering menopause, you're, whatever, sometimes whatever. There's a whole host of reasons. So it's not necessarily, maybe you had a child, whatever. It's not necessarily just the normal menstruation. Okay? So anytime you have any kind of uterine bleeding, not due to trauma, you are considered to be a nida, even when it's not full-on menstruation. So a woman can become a nida even if a drop of blood exits her uterus at any point in her cycle. Okay? So again, karet is why this law, being cut off is why this law is so important. So a woman ceases to be a nida and returns to a state of ritual purity, tahara, as my husband was saying before, by confirming that the bleeding has ceased, and typically doing in the rabbinic world an internal examination, whatever, we won't get deep into that. Counting 7 blood-free days, Shavia Nikim, which is, the Bible says that after the menstruation, a woman is to count 7 days for quote-unquote 7 clean days, okay? And then she is supposed to immerse in a mikvah, a ritual bath, and then she can return to having marital relations with her husband. So there's a whole process that has to go through here. So again, the 5 stages are, you have to wait 4 or 5 days of your period time. Then you need to do a check to make sure that your bleeding has ceased. Counting your 7 days, okay? Then preparing to go to the mikvah, and then actually go into the mikvah. You need to do those 5 steps before you can return back to your husband and purity in the marriage relationship. So in the Sephardic tradition, you wait 4 days. In the Ashkenazi tradition, you wait 5 days in the beginning before you do your checking. So that's just a cultural difference, and we won't get deep into that. So there are two aspects that are derived from the Torah about nida laws. And one is to refrain from sex, okay? And the other is to be kind, so to speak, during this period. And the reason for this is because the Torah actually describes a nida woman as being dava, or weary, okay? And presumably, she's weary because obviously, her life is spent in constant preparation to be ready to give life, okay? The reality of that is actually pretty grave, in the sense that your body is never in a homeostasis. It's constantly being, changed. And that's a really important thing, for women. So a woman's body needs to be recharged. And as we know from the Word of God, it says life of the flesh is in the blood. And when you lose blood, you're losing literally life force, okay? Just practically speaking. So it's essential to the creation of a holy, healthy child for this recharging to be happening, okay? Without it, she cannot give her full energy to the formation of life. There must be a waxing and a waning. So men are supposed to have compassion and be kind to women during this period. So not to try to take from your wife when she already feels weary from this constant state of preparation. It will not be good for her physical health or for the health of your future children if she's constantly being put in a state of being extra demanded on, even at a time when her body is trying to heal itself. To recover. So, if you imagine, you don't take someone who just came out of the hospital and say, let's practice for a marathon. You don't do that, right? So, in reality, a woman's body is going through this, but because it's not something that happens to a man, it kind of is out of sight, out of mind. It's not necessarily that men are trying to be mean or whatever. They just don't know what's going on with you, and whatever. So the Torah is just kind of extra reminding, hey, be mindful. This is what's going on in her universe. You really need to be aware of that, because it will have effects for your family in the future. And, having children is one of the most important mitzvahs in the Bible, so being fruitful and multiplying. So to be able to do that rightly is important. There have actually been a lot of, not judging anybody in any situations at all, but there's definitely a lot of rabbinical commentaries and even medical commentaries that talk about when a woman gets pregnant at the inappropriate times, you know what I'm saying, in her cycle or whatever. If you think about it logically, if your egg is not good, if your body is not fully prepared and your uterine lining is, in a sense of decay, and it's not, fully, what's the right word, fresh, okay, and you get pregnant during this time, your baby starts off its life in a not good place, okay, in a not not good foundation, right? With the freshest food, with the best, intentions, with the best, whatever of what it could have. And that a lot of people believe that that's why a lot of the diseases, autisms, and, the infirmities, that allergies and things that children have today that seem to be very prevalent, why, aside from, of course, our horrible eating habits, we won't go into that, but, that this aids in why there are so many physical issues with children, that God is trying to illustrate to you, this is the right way to get pregnant. This is the right way to be in union with your husband. When those things don't happen, don't think that there's no repercussions to those things, is the point of what I'm trying to say. So anyways, so doing nida properly as a couple is not merely just to refrain from sex, as fasting is not merely a refraining from eating, right? You have to pray, or that's not a correct fast. So a man, if a man is not trying to get to know his wife in other ways that are non-sexual during this time, but rather familiar, you're not really doing the nida, you're not really being the compassionate person correctly, because you're not doing it in full. So this is essential to allow all aspects of your marriage to grow, right? Because in truth, the only thing that separates your marriage from a friendship is the sexual aspect, right? Otherwise, you're just friends, you know, who share a house, so to speak.
In a sense of speaking.
In a sense of speaking, okay? And so, what happens, especially for women, is sometimes you can feel like that's all your value is to someone else. And, you know, when there's this time of separation, it not only sends the signal to the man, and I didn't get deep into this because, you know, we can get deep into this from the Torah, and I will do that at some point, but where the man has to understand, because to a certain extent, the man is the head of the food chain, right? He's the head of the woman, whatever. So, you know, so because of that, I mean, obviously God is the head of everybody, but you know what I'm saying? He's the head of the food chain on this earth here. And so because of that, sometimes men can get the misperception like they're big pimping. You know what I mean? Like they're the boss. They're the, you know, they're the boss. They're in control. They're, you know, whatever. And you can kind of see the way that men treat women all throughout the world. It's like we own you. And this separation is God's way of saying, no, the earth is the Lord's and its fullness thereof. Amen. You don't own her. You don't always own her. Her time, her body belongs to me first. And so in a spiritual context, that's really important for men to, a message that men really need to hear and to employ on a regular basis. So it is also a command for a man to yodea, to know his wife, okay? So that doesn't just mean in a sexual context, but I believe that in a nida context, it applies to everything. You are supposed to know your wife in more than just one aspect. And so when you have this time of separation, it forces you to look at your wife, to appreciate her for all the things that you were able to appreciate of her in the beginning, before sex entered the mix, and why you fell in love with her in the first place. It forces you to connect on all the other levels in your marriage. And God knows this, right? So anyways.
Amen. So
you shouldn't just remove sex, you need to replace it with a different kind of intimacy. Okay, not doing this makes nida not just half-hearted, but it makes it less effective, because it's also more difficult to keep also if you're not really doing the other parts, right? It makes it difficult to keep to this because you are not intellectually and emotionally being stimulated in other ways. So the rabbis also, in addition to this, because of the severity of karet, of the laws of being cut off, add extra stringencies, which are called harkachot, which is separations. Harkachot. That's always a tongue twister for me. Anyway, separations, which include not just not having sex, but they add an extra fence just to ensure that you don't even get close to actually violating the commands. So in an Orthodox world, men and women will sleep in separate beds. They will not physically touch at all, not even pass each other things for the fear that they might touch. Okay, they will not say excessively things that are, kind, like, wow, you look really good today, and something like that, because it's going to, bring up to someone's mind other things, etc. Not seeing each other naked, there's a whole bunch of others, we're not going to get into it, but of blocks in place to try to help to keep that family purity. So even though you may, let's say, be sterile, maybe you can't have children, whatever, these laws of nida are still in effect, okay, no matter what. So unless you are past the point of menstruation, etc. But even in those cases, it's not biblically mandated. But when you've practiced your whole life, these particular sets of laws of understanding and respecting each other's boundaries, and times where you are going to be able to connect, times when you're not, when you go into another season of life, you have built up a lifetime of marriage respect that you can bank on in the later years when you are now together all the time. You understand what I'm saying? Because now, and when a lot of the people today feel like when they have empty nest syndrome, the kids all go off, you're stuck in the house, and it's like, I don't even know this person, because all you were to me was mother, all you were to me was father. Why is this happening? Because you never spent all those years doing Taharos Mishpacha. You didn't do those times in which you were relating to each other on other levels. And so, anyways, so I just say that because I know there's some people on this thing who are like, that doesn't apply to me now, let's, fast forward. But in truth, if you were employing that, then maybe you'd feel differently. And so if you are feeling like that in your season of your marriage or relationship, then maybe, employing some measure of separation would be a good thing, so that you can actually start to practice that just on a practical level, not on a next Torah level or whatever, like you have to. But anyway, so now that we've talked about holy people and trying to be holy in our relationships, in our marriages, in our speech, we're going to talk about holy places now. So as I was mentioning before, a woman has to go to a mikvah, which is an immersion pool, in order to...
Not just women, men too.
No, but for the need.
But yes, for the need.
To purify, to reconnect with her husband. And yes, men do go to the mikvah. Also, some men have the tradition to go there every Shabbat. Some only go before Yom Kippur. So there are different traditions, etc. But the mikvah is open, whenever you want to go. You just have to make, reservations or whatever. The closest mikvah here is in Atlanta, which is pretty far.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of rules about mikvah and ritual immersion, etc. You see Yeshua, you see John the Baptist, Yochanan the Immerser, right? Immersing people for the remission of sins.
So it's a ritual immersion bath. And so there's a set, according to the rabbis, there's a set amount for that bath to be filled with, about 40 seah, which is a few gallons. I don't know the exact amount right offhand, but we know that as far as the mikvah is supposed to be from a natural water source, living water, right? So there are places that do have this. Now, if this is not available, you can actually go to an active water source, living water. So you go to a lake. I would probably say it's stream, but more of a lake, river, or even go to the ocean, right? That's living water. That's technically a mikvah, because we read in Genesis that God brought the waters together, and so that bringing together, that gathering of the waters, is what is a mikvah or mikveh.
So in the biblical understanding of mikvah, it's to represent when you are born. So just like when you're in the womb and you are surrounded by water, okay? When the New Testament is talking about being reborn, this is what it's talking about. Why, when you do the tevilah, you do the immersion, you go under the water and you come out anew. And I explained, in the membership classes as well, that that immersion needs to be done naked. You are supposed to be fully naked, just like when you were a baby, because it is a symbol of rebirth, okay? And nobody's pushing you under the water, nobody is supposed to be touching you, whatever, okay? So the way it's done in kind of Christian contexts is not biblical, it's not rabbinic, it's not biblical in the understanding of how it's being performed. And I understand their heart. I'm just saying that, doing a immersion in a pool is not the same thing as doing it in a mikvah. And because again, it has to be living water. It has representation. It's not just, it's not just the idea of the thing. It's how it is performed. Everything in Judaism has a meaning. It has a purpose. You can't just substitute one thing for the other and it's the same thing. No, it's not the same thing. Sunday will never be the same as Sabbath. And a pool will never be the same as, mikvahing in living water. It's not the same. Yeah, it's not the same biblically. Everything has a meaning. So when Yeshua is talking about these things, and John is talking about these things, they have significance that won't make sense if you take them out of their context. So anyways, so we're not going to get deep into the mikvah.
That would probably be for another class for another time.
And here, because it's not something that I think most people really are able to do. If you're not in a Jewish community, it can be very difficult to kind of do this.
And even listen, even for our community, the last week was looking for to have a mikvah done for a particular individual, Baruch Hashem. So, but recently found out that was it? There's no swimming in Lake Lanier, and of course there's reasons why. But also, Fort Yargo, that they closed their beach or the water area, the lake, for renovation. So it's going to be quite a while for that. So we're having to address the issue and possibility for another opportunity or what to do in lieu of that. But that I think we'll have open up for another class possibly.
And we spoke with you guys briefly. We're talking about trying to, at some point, for God to open the doors for us to have our own congregation. But in the Jewish world, a mikveh is built before a synagogue is even built, because the ability for a husband and wife to be together in communion is more important, and for a man to be able to ritually be pure to go before the Lord is more important than even a synagogue being built. So in our conversations with people, I have to keep reminding people the mikveh will be built first. The mikveh will be built first. We will have a mikveh before we will have a synagogue. But it's really important for our community to be able to ritually immerse. So hopefully, by the grace of God, the living water, our Messiah Yeshua, will help that to come to pass sooner than later. So, amen.
Amen.
Anyways, so now we're going to kind of talk about a little bit about synagogue life and what it means to have purity within the synagogue environment. Yes, there are a lot of traditions regarding how to be in a synagogue, because Jewish people have a lot of traditions regarding everything. Okay. It's a 5,000-year-old religion. You're not going to learn it overnight. You're not going to observe it overnight. So be at peace, okay? Nobody's judging you. But we're just trying to explain whatever level of observance you're at, the things that are important biblical principles, so you are aware of what's important to the Lord first and foremost, because that's how you have to walk it out, right? Step by step, passage by passage, right? So purity in a synagogue environment is, yes, you have to guard your speech. And we have often mentioned to people, we're going to talk about mezuzah, I think, a little bit later, but as a holy thing. But, mezuzahs, the encasements on the synagogue doors are important, as well as they're being important on your homes of your doors of your home, because they're reminders to leave the junk outside. That's super important. So, when you come home to your family, whatever happened at work, whatever, leave that junk outside. When you walk into a synagogue environment and you're supposed to be saying Ma Tovu, which is then repeated once you get into the synagogue corporately, okay? But you're supposed to be saying Ma Tovu before you get into the synagogue. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. As for me, in the abundance of your loving kindness, I will enter your house. You know what I'm saying? All those things is like, it's a reminder for you. Before you get into this building, you need to get yourself right. Don't bring your junk over here. You need to be in a state of purity, because when it's time to pray, when it's time to worship, your mind needs to be on prayer, it needs to be on worship, it needs to be on communing with other believers to be in one accord. Otherwise, to be honest, you might as well stay at home. I mean, that's the truth, right? The reason you're coming together with other believers is because you want to have the peace, you want to have the achdut, the unity, you want to worship together, because there's a recognition of the spirit of multiplication when you come together. Do not neglect the assembling of yourselves together. It's important to build each other up. So if you come in with all your junk, and that doesn't mean that you don't have stresses in life, if you've had a death or this or that, that there isn't, difficult things that you're going through. I'm not saying, put on a fake face. Like sometimes you go and everybody's like, yeah, I'm blessed and highly favored. And their house just burnt down. And it's like, okay, yes, you want to be upbeat, you want to be positive, and you want to be, content in whatever circumstance you are. But, so it's not to ignore what may be realities of what's going on in your life. It's a recognition that God is sovereign over all. To know before whom you stand. Amen. That when you get before the Lord, and that phrase, know before whom you stand, is written on many, arcs, Torah arch, okay? Yeah. Know before whom you stand, because before you get up there to do mitzvah, to carry the Torah, to read from the Torah, to whatever, there's a recognition. You have to realize that you're coming before the King of Kings. There has to be a holiness, a reverentialness to that. You cannot just come before him however the heck you want. And so we get into this also in the, in the membership classes, talking about how people dress, how people whatever. And does God necessarily, does he want you to go out and, spend all your money and buy $9 billion clothes? No, that's not what I'm saying. But, yes, God will take you however he can get you, because he wants you to come in the door. Amen. But he expects you to leave differently than the way that you came. And recognizing that we serve a holy God, you should have special clothes when you come into the synagogue. You should not be wearing the same things you wear all the time. You know what I'm saying? There should be a level of Kedusha that is representative. Holiness. Thank you, my translator. A representation of holiness, that when you come before the Lord, that has to be essential there. So even when you're talking with other people about what happened to you during the week, be mindful that, while other people genuinely want to know what happened to you, are you saying it in the right spirit? Or are you literally just dumping all your problems onto someone else 5 minutes before they're going to stand before the Lord and pray? It doesn't mean that they don't want to pray for you, for your problems. But you know what I'm saying? You have to have an awareness of all those kinds of things. And even in the Amidah, the Shmoneh Esrei, the 18 benedictions, there's actually 19 anyways. But the 18 benedictions that are said during the week for the men who have been praying with David on Sunday morning are saying these prayers together. But on Shabbat, there are only 7 parts of that Amidah that are recited. They take out all of the parts that are regarding you asking and petitioning God for stuff. Because on Shabbat, it's his day. It's a day to commune with him. It's a day to just be with him in his presence. It's not a day to I don't want to say complain. You know what I'm saying? But there has to be a difference there. That Shabbat is an island of rest. You need to rest even from your complaining. So we ask the Lord that, when you come into the synagogue environment, there has to be an understanding of holiness in what you're saying, in the way that you dress, in the way that your children are coming. Are they running around and acting crazy? Do they recognize that you're standing on holy ground? Is that something you're modeling at home? You know what I'm saying? So there has to be that awareness also, that the things that you're doing during the week, there has to be a separation between the Sabbath and the rest of the week, because God sanctified the Sabbath. He made it holy. It needs to be holy. It needs to look different than all the other days of the week. It has to be special to you in every way, shape, or form. And yes, that takes time, okay? And God will, continue to revitalize that in your life, day by day. But a lot of the ways that, you can accomplish those things is just by removing the things that are distractions. Removing the prayers that you would normally say, that, asking God for things to, for you, yourself, and you, and saying, no, Lord, what do you want me to have? What do you want me to pray? How do you want me to sing? How do you want me to whatever? And just to be very, God focused, what do you want me to be doing with my time? Should I be checking my emails right now? No, probably not, so.
And that concept goes right into the heart of prayer too, right?
Yes.
Is that when we enter into prayer, we have to have an awareness, right? So and that's essentially the purpose of prayer, is to increase one's awareness of God in your life and what role he plays in it. So if we only pray when we feel like inspired to, like, okay, you know what, I'm going to pray to the Lord right now and everything's going to go well. Well, what about the next day? What about the next hour? Like, are we really bringing that awareness to the full? Are we growing in that awareness of God? No, not really. And so this is where we're to keep God before us, or before us, yes, even at all times. And we try to. So where in Proverbs 3:6 it says, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. So when we talk about prayer, and I think we're transitioning right now, we're talking about prayer, the focus, or even the word prayer in Hebrew, is tefillah. Tefillah, which comes from the verb palel. So which word palel means to judge. So usually we we use the reflexive verb lehit palel, which means to pray. So, but even with this term lehit palel, it means to judge oneself.
Literally.
Literally, to judge oneself. So, in this sense, the time of prayer, we're taking a sort of self-evaluation. It's like we're taking the self-evaluation when a person addresses God with, you may have a lot of requests, a lot of things that you have on your mind. You're presenting it to Him. It's like, well, we're having to take that evaluation, and so we're searching our heart. We're searching our heart. Want to add?
Yeah, because as I mentioned in the membership classes, there's basically, when you pray, you're asking God to kind of give you an awareness of where you are in relation to Him. When you're trying to walk toward God, you have to know where you are, where He is, to chart the course. Okay? So when you pray, you're basically doing a Marco Polo with God. Marco Polo, where are you? And not to be funny, but that's really what prayer ultimately is you're saying, where am I in relation to you? Why can't I hear your voice well? Why do you sound so far away? What has happened in my relationship with you, what I've sinned, what I've done during the week, that you seem far away? You know what I mean? So when you talk to the Lord and you're like, okay, Lord, I can hear you over here. I can hear you inkling to me. Let me walk this way. And so ultimately the purpose of prayer is really to deepen your relationship and your ability to hear the voice of God, so that you can walk rightly with Him. So without that constant checking in with the Lord, praying 3 times a day, as is spoken of in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Scriptures, to pray 3 times toward Jerusalem, okay, as the prophets did. That it's important that you're constantly having that check-in with the Lord in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. You know what I'm saying? Like, where am I in relation to you? And when you think about that, just how often you really need to be in prayer, how often are you lost?
And even it was a custom for the disciples in Yeshua, and even those who were grafted in among the nations, to pray the Tefillat HaAdon, or the disciples' prayer, the Lord's Prayer, 3 times a day. Now, I'm not saying that everyone's got to do it like tomorrow, but I would definitely encourage you to do so. Why? Because it puts God's throne, God's presence in the forefront of one's mind. Yeah. It's like when we're 3 times a day, we're asking that God would sanctify His name, that He would bring His kingdom, right? All of these things, we're bringing it to the forefront of our minds. And so this is the very thing that Messiah taught His disciples, and even down to us, that He teaches us to do as we pray to the Father, right? Mm-hmm. So, but all that comes with kavanah. And I know one thing, when people...
Heart's intention.
The heart's intent, see? It goes back and forth. So, even with prayer, a lot of times people, especially with regard to, say, liturgy, which is great, you have communal prayer. But also, was it prayer that is spontaneous, or you're going to address a certain situation? Sometimes people will begin to stammer, ramble, or even part of a group, your mind may wander. Well, why does that happen? Because you did not make the preparation. A lot of times you get so caught up in something and your mind lingers or wanders. So this is where the focus of kavanah, the heart's intent, where is your heart directed? And so especially in prayer, this is very important. Even to the point that many of the sages of the first century, they made it a practice, even before congregating together for corporate prayer, they made sure to take, and I'm not suggesting that we all do this because we got stuff to do, right? But they had this practice where they would take an hour to prepare. So if we would just take 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, prepare to go before the Lord mentally, physically, and first we thank Him, we prepare our hearts, right? So, but that is something that is key, that is very important.
So I have a couple of videos that I did on my page regarding liturgical prayers and why liturgy is important in Judaism, specifically because it brings people together in praying the same thing with the same heart and the same mind. Spontaneous prayer is great, which I do more often than not. But when you come together as a group, it's important to make communal declarations. It really has a lot of power and weight to it. So I know sometimes people are like, why are these Jews like repeating the same things over and over again? And while I don't believe that should be, all the time, every time, it is important in certain contexts to make sure that everybody's on the same page. They have the same heart when they're praying before God. We're all, walking in the same direction, so to speak. It is a centering point for the entire community. And that's important. So I have a video specifically detailing some importances about that. I can send you the link about that. And David's also going to talk about Hitbodedut here in a minute, which is like praying outdoors and that kind of prayer, because that's important to have a vibrant prayer life, is ultimately to activate all the different kinds of prayer in your life. Having the spontaneous prayers, having the liturgical, regular, rabbinic type of prayers, having the, Hitbodedut, outdoor type of prayers. Having all these aspects in your prayer life is going to be important, because if you're doing only one, then sometimes, let's be honest, things can get stale. Just like in, any marriage relationship, right? You're doing the same thing over and over again. It's gonna, you need a little bit of, new life. And there are going to be different ways to pray that are going to connect with you differently as a person, okay? I like Hitbodedut. I like to pray outdoors. Where David prefers to pray inside, kind of in a little closet type of environment.
Every now and then I'll pray outdoors.
But that's not the norm. That's not.
Yeah. So Hitbodedut, this term actually means solitude or seclusion. And so this term was really popularized by Rebbe Nachman of Breslov, who lived in the 17 to 1800s. So, and this referred to kind of an unstructured, spontaneous, and individualized form of prayer. And the focus was just relating to God as a friend, just relating to Him, just pouring out your prayer. And so this method involves again, talking to God in intimate, but also in an informal manner. So, and what's interesting to note is that, according to Rebbe Nachman, that many of the wise and also pious individuals that we read from the scriptures, from Abraham to King David, even up to the first centuries, where many of the rabbinic sages had participated or at least done some form of Hitbodedut. As a matter of fact, this was actual similar practice that we are instructed by our Rebbe, by Yeshua the Messiah. And this instruction is found in Matthew chapter 6, verse 6. Right? So this is one of the many different ways or many different types of prayer that is very important for every believer to participate in.
And I find value in praying outdoors, because when you're out, when you're inside, all you see is man's handiwork. But when you're outside, you see the Lord's handiwork. And there's something very majestic about that, in the perfection of what the Lord has done, that gives you a reason to rejoice. And so for me, it helps to spark my prayer life. So one of the things that anybody who's seen the movie War Room, talks about, basically having a space within your home in order for you to pray, that is sanctified space, for you to pray, for you to read, for you to study, whatever the case may be, and how important that really is, because what you're ultimately doing is you are creating a portal in your home. Just like God created a portal within the entire community of Israel, He put the Mishkan, He put the tabernacle right in the midst of the people. He said, I want it to be bitocham, I want it to be within you, literally within you, okay? Mm-hmm. So when you have that space in your home that's only for God and for nothing else, that sanctification, you are creating a portal for God to be able to work from the inside out. And how deeply important that is. Anybody who, has done any kind of warfare will tell you it's a lot easier once you're inside the gates than when you're outside, right? Yep. When you're trying to take over the city. So when you think about that in the mindset of having that sanctified space in your own home, what you're doing is you're giving God quarter in your house to work from the inside out, which makes it so much easier for Him to do the work that is necessary for Him to do. So I just want to encourage you. I've heard quite a bunch of testimonies about that. When people finally make, an altar, so to speak, to the Lord within their home, what changes in the atmosphere in their environment. So, anyways, remember to give God the first and the best.
Amen.
So now we're going to move to, now we talked about holy people, we talked about holy places, the synagogue, your home, etc. Now we're going to talk about holy things. So there are many different holy things in Judaism, quite a lot of them. We don't have time to go through everything, so we talked about, candlesticks, last time, and, Kiddush cups for Shabbat and all that stuff. So we're going to talk about challah specifically because that's related very deeply to Shabbat. So it says in Numbers 15, 20 to 21, the first portion of your kneading you shall separate as a dough offering, challah. In all your generations, give the first of your kneading as an elevated gift to God. So colloquially, we refer to challah as like the egg bread you eat on Shabbat. But challah literally just means that separation of dough. So it doesn't have to be that specific dough variety on Shabbat, okay? It's referring to the dough that is consecrated to the Lord. So whenever you bake bread. This applies to bread made from flour of the 5 grains, wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye. Numbers refers to challah as the first of our kneading bowl. So in this way also, we may have number of different spiritual pursuits in our lives that might only make up a portion of what we're able to accomplish in one full day, but they need to be the first and the best of everything that we are. Amen. There has to be that separation. So if you keep that in your mind, that in order to be holy, holy means to be set apart, there has to be aspects in your speech, in your walk, in your prayer, in your whatever. Everything has to have a set apartness within it. Even your cooking. When you really understand that, it will change your life, honestly. So in practice, the portion reserved for the Kohen, which is why there's a separation happening here, cannot be eaten because the temple is destroyed and there's no way for the Kohen to purify himself in order to be ritually clean, in order to eat the piece that you are separating. But we still separate the dough in anticipation of the future rebuilding of the Tabernacle of David. So the leftover piece in practice is actually usually wrapped in foil and it's put in the oven and it is burned, cooked till it's burnt or whatever, when nothing else is in the oven, just that little piece, okay? And the intention of that is really to render it pasul, render it invalid, so nobody can actually come back later and eat it, and because it is now sanctified, okay? Which is also important when we're talking about nida and a menstruating woman. And there are things you can't do when you're a menstruating woman, when you're impure, including do a holy act where you're creating something that is pure in service to the Lord. So you cannot perform this act in the same way when you're in the ritual impurity. So anyways, but typically women do this tradition as they generally prepare the meals for the family. So this is normally a thing that women do, but any man can do it. Anybody over bar bat mitzvah age can fulfill this commandment. So challah is separated after the flour and the liquid are mixed together, while the dough is still whole before it's been divided for any other purposes. So now that it is a complete entity, now you're going to give the best, right? Now it's the thing, right? Now you're going to separate the portion for God first before you do anything else with it. And you typically recite this blessing, which says, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies you with commandments and commanded us to separate challah." Okay? So typically you take about a golf ball size, whatever, and you make a declaration. This is challah. Okay? You're declaring what it is. So anyway, so challah should be separated, like I said, before baking. However, if you weren't able to do so because the batter was too loose, as is the case with some cakes, okay, or if you forgot to separate challah before baking, then it should be separated after baking before any of the goods are eaten. Challah is separated from base goods by placing the baked loaves or challahs in a box or container, covering them with a cloth, and then taking a piece from one of the loaves and saying the blessing, if applicable. As stated before, you don't eat the separated portion, but burn it later and discard it. So if you notice, when the challah is there, David doesn't know if Publix, most likely did not, separate out the challah dough. So he always pulls off a piece and puts it aside And sometimes we have to remind people, don't eat the piece that he pulled aside. That's not for you. That's for the priest. So, anyways, maybe we should put a piece of fool next time so people know not to eat it. But regardless, that's what's going on with that. So, in order to separate the challah and recite the blessing, the dough should be a certain size and weight and this and that. We won't get too deep into that because it's getting late. But anywho, okay, so now we're going to come to mezuzahs.
Mezuzah contains the first two paragraphs of the Shema, and both of these paragraphs include the commandment to inscribe them these words on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So the affixing of a mezuzah fulfills this Torah commandment, and it does so in a literal way. And of course, just as the recitation of the evening and morning Shema, when you lie down, when you get up, fulfills literally another part of the same text. So in the Mishnah, the mezuzah is associated with the Shema, Tefillin, the Amidah, or standing prayer, and the Birkat HaMazon, the blessing or grace after meals. Of course, the mezuzah are supposed to be in the specific place, the third of the doorpost, and so it's the actual, what we're talking about is the actual parchment that is inscribed with the passage in Deuteronomy chapter 6 and also chapter 11. And so that's supposed to be a reminder to all that enter and all who leave the house that remember that to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. And these are the words. And we're to remember the words of His Torah. Amen. So we'll jump to another reminder.
Yeah, and there's different traditions on how to affix it. But in any case, a mezuzah should be on every door in your home, okay? With the exception of the bathroom, because the bathroom is considered an impure place or a not pure place. To come back to our conversation before.
I would say at best, if you can only afford one, go for the one at the front.
Yeah. So
front door. Yeah. At the very least.
So you do your best to step by step. But typically, it's on every doorpost, gates as well, in your home. And if you have like archways that are thick enough that lead in one space into another, you'd put it on there too. So anyway, if you have questions about how to affix a mezuzah, there are differences between Sephardics and the Ashkenazis. The Sephardic one puts theirs straight up and down, and the Ashkenazi puts theirs on the way facing in the door. So just different cultural traditions. But anyways, so if you need help fixing a mezuzah, let us know. Yeah.
So I'm going to go real quick with this one. This is the tzitzit. All right. So this is another command relating to as symbolism or remembrance. So Numbers chapter 15 verse 37 through 41 states, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, they are to make for themselves fringes or tzitzit on the corners of their garments throughout their generations." Of course, the purpose is to look at it and to recall all the commandments of the Lord, to observe them. So who is this for? Well, we could say that it is for the children of Israel. Now, tzitzit are traditionally worn by men. So although some women have taken on the practice, and of course one reason women are not obligated, to wear tzitzit as men are, it's because it is considered a time-bound positive command, which women are exempt from. Of course, Tali Gadol,
we have to explain that, because I don't think people understand. So the Torah is divided, basically all the laws, the 613 laws in the Torah are divided into positive and negative commandments. Mm-hmm. Positive meaning do this, negative commandments meaning don't do this, time-bound commandments, and not time-bound commandments. So those four quadrants. So time-bound commandments meaning do this on the third day of the fourth month, and yada yada, okay? And then other commandments like do not steal, which would apply all the time, okay? So women are exempt from, in the rabbinic world, from doing positive commandments that are time-bound, meaning you have to do this on such and such time. And the reason for that is because women's priority is their home. So let's just say you have a child that's sick at home, and the Torah says, it's Yom Kippur, you need to put on your right clothes, you need to, whatever, and go to the synagogue, okay? X, Y, Z. You've got a sick child at home, that's your priority above all else. So you don't have to worry about, oh, okay, I'm not able to fulfill this command from the Lord, because the home and your kids, that environment supersedes, the rest. So anyways, that's just according to the rabbis.
Right. And of course, there's other reasons why. We'll just, for time's sake, we'll move through. So with the fringes, there's also the instruction to put on blue, which is called in Hebrew techelet, right? So it says in verse 38, that they put upon the fringe of their borders right band of blue. Why the importance of blue? Why techelet? Techelet is similar to the color of the sea, and the sea is comparable to the sky, and the sky is likened to God's throne, or the throne of His presence. And this is taken from Talmud Menachot 43b. This is an allusion to God's presence, related to the sea, related to heaven and His throne. So when we look at this, when we look at the Techelet, we're remembering God's presence, His throne, and also the commandments that He given to us. So Techelet is a particular blue from the sea creature that was called the Chilazon. It was an ancient sea creature. Now, at a certain point in history,
Mollusk.
It was like a mollusk. Now, of course, approximately 1,000 years ago, the Chilazon, which always was hard to come by, to the extent that in Menachot 44a tells us that it surfaced only once every 70 years. And then later on, it became unavailable altogether. So after a while, its exact identity became unknown. But of course, in recent time, the focus or the view to try to bring back the Chilazon and the dying process had begun. And of course, there are many who tried to recover the identity of the Chilazon. So most notable among them were the Radziner Rebbe, who goes by the name of Rabbi Gershon Henoch Leiner, and also Israeli Chief Rabbi Herzog. So Rabbi Leiner maintained that the cuttlefish was the lost Chilazon, and proceeded to produce and distribute the dye. Of course, others would say it was a Murex trunculus, and that has been identified. But there are still doubts in the greater Jewish community as far as its authenticity. So according to Jewish law, it's been acceptable in the Jewish community to simply wear white tzitzit. It's fine. And why they allow this? Why? Because the commandment says it's got to be, there's blue in there. The reason being is because there's concern for inauthenticity, if there's a counterfeit. So this is why it's allowed. So mind you, and I have to say this, that if you're finding tzitzit, it's got to be white and blue. No other colors. Biblically, no other colors. So it's just white and blue, right? So there's also another reason why the techelet, why the blue, why is there such a concern about it? So Rabbi Shlomo Dov Ber, the 5th Rebbe of Lubavitch, maintained that the techelet will not return until the coming of Messiah. That's very important. And so, which one is it? Which techelet is it? I would just ask for those that are not part of our community. Well, ask your rabbi. What does he say about it? So I have here the Radziner techelet, which it has the strings and the blue, the techelet. So I do encourage that for those that are interested in getting tzitziot, or even for the techelet, that you could get one. Right?
Sometimes when you buy a Messianic talit, I'm just going to warn you here a little bit, that they put a blue thread in there that is not from any of the approved or possible versions of techelet, from the Chilazon, okay? That doesn't qualify for the command. You can't go buy some, polyester string at the Walmart and stick it in there. That's not the same thing. You need to remember, these things are holy articles. God has a reason why He's chosen the animal He's chosen, the reason He's chosen the dye He's chosen. You can't just put whatever you want, insert whatever the heck you want here, and it'd be the same thing. No. It's set apart for a reason. So
Right. If anything, what I do say, like I would encourage that if you do get the strings with the chaylet, that you would put it on your talit gadol, your large prayer shawl. At least have that, and then if there's those that are interested to go further, then do that.
David can help you wrap. We don't need to talk about it. Okay, for those of you who are part of our community, he can help you figure out. There are a lot of different ways to tie tzitzits, okay?
Yes.
A lot of different community traditions, whatever.
That's true, yes.
So we're not going to get deep into that. If you need to know more about that, because you're supposed to tie your own. When you buy a talit katan, whatever, which is the big talit you wear over your clothes, and then the talit katan is one that you wear under, men wear under their clothes. And the reason for that is that back in the ancient days or whatever, when there was a lot of anti-Semitism, men didn't want to go around wearing the talit gadol, okay, all the time, which is kind of like, for lack of better words, a poncho, right? They didn't want to wear that all the time, just like you see in the book of Ruth. Spread your garment over me, for you are redeeming kinsman. This is what she's referring to, his talit, okay? That he's wearing on his outer garment. The problem is that because of anti-Semitism, everyone would be able to spot that you are a Jew, which was the entire purpose of wearing the tzitzits in the first place. But for the preservation of life, there were some other changes made to this because of that. So what ended up happening in Judaism is you ended up with a talit gadol, the big one that is used in communal service when you are in closed doors with other Jewish people or at home. And then you have talit katan, which is the one that's worn under your garments, which people don't see, okay? So that you're still fulfilling the command without, putting yourself in a harmful position. Let's put it like that. So, anyways, so now just briefly we're going to talk about the talit, four-corner garment.
Yeah, so in ancient times it was customary to wear four-cornered garments in daily life, and Israel is here commanded to attach tzitzit to such garments as a symbol of the mitzvot, like I was mentioning before. So, and this is found in Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 12, that it had to be four-cornered. So once people no longer wore such garments, it became common to wear a special four-cornered shawl with tzitzit, and this is referring to the prayer shawl, the talit gadol. So this is for the morning service in the synagogue. So in this way, the tzitzit are worn, handled, and looked upon daily, just like the mezuzah and tefillin. They represent symbolically the divine words that govern Jewish life and give it meaning, direction, and purpose.
Tefillin are phylacteries, which is again coming back to Deuteronomy. That's what it mentions about, putting the mezuzah on the door, then bind them for a sign upon your hand, let them be frontlets between your eyes, which is why you see pictures of, male Jewish people with some kind of weird box on their head. This is what this is referring to. It has the prayers in them, so they're literally fulfilling all of those commands, as my husband was explaining before. So,
all right, and so four-cornered garments. So again, I would also suggest that there are those within the other communities that are not the Messianic community that would use tzitzit as belt loops. This does not fulfill the command.
No.
It doesn't fulfill the command. However, what you could do is take a t-shirt, cut the sides, make holes in the four corners of the t-shirt, use those, and then attach those. That would be
making a caveat here. The t-shirt needs to be new. It needs to be sanctified for this purpose.
Yes.
Don't just grab some t-shirt that's in your closet with weird writing on it.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
No.
But there's option. And so why am I relating to this regarding the four corners? Because this is what God commanded, and it's representative of His word and His will. And so there's ways to go about fulfilling His will.
So we're not going to talk deeply about shofars and stuff, which a lot of people, have in their homes and stuff. Everybody likes the shofars because it makes a joyful noise and, whatever. But the command is to hear the sound of the shofar, especially on Rosh Hashanah. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's not to blow the shofar, even though in the older days, yes, most men had a shofar within their home for a lot of different purposes, for calling their kids back, for an alarm, if something was going on, whatever. It was kind of like having a whistle, right, so to speak, that, would just let everybody know in the community if something was going amiss, okay? So, so I'm not trying to discourage anybody from buying one, but I'm just saying that it's not necessarily something that's on the list of things you need to buy. That's number one on the list of things that is necessary, okay? So I will say here as a caveat, since we're talking about women earlier and some of the laws regarding women, that, in our congregation, we are, I would say, a little bit more orthodox in certain sense of some of these things, because things have significance to them. Those significances are important and they're not to be overlooked simply because we live in a modern world, okay? So when it comes to tzitzits, this is typically something that is referring to men, especially when it comes to talits, which is what tzitzits are supposed to be attached to, okay? That four-corner garment. It represents a covering, which again is what was mentioned in the book of Ruth, and also, the kanfot, the wings, we come under his wings, mentioned, I think it's Psalms, that we come under for refuge. It's a symbol of covering. Women do not cover themselves, okay? This is not correct, okay, biblically. Your husband covers you, your father covers you, Hashem covers you. You do not cover yourself. And unfortunately, this bad theology with all of this weird feminism we see today has corrupted a lot of things within the biblical world, okay? Women do not cover themselves, okay? Let's not get into all divorced people and all this kind of stuff, okay? On a general principle, that's the way it is in the Bible. And so talit is symbolic of covering. So in our congregation, women do not wear talits, okay? It's not really appropriate, okay? In a communal environment. Women do not blow the shofar for the same reason, because shofar symbolizes a call to assembly, a call to war, those kind of things, and those things are generally associated with men. Okay, so if there are no men present to do those functions, then a woman can do functions that the men would normally do, just like the men can do the functions women can do, like lighting the candles, separating the challah, whatever, because there's nobody to do them, okay? And the mitzvahs can get done in general by whoever, okay? So when it comes to those understanding things in a synagogue environment, whatever, what procedures are appropriate for you in your congregational environment are going to vary from synagogue to synagogue. So talk to your leaders, of what, mitzvahs they feel like apply to women. We also don't allow women to carry the Torah at our congregation either, because Torahs especially are generally very heavy. And if you drop it, the whole congregation has to fast for 40 days. So, so I just say that to say that when we're talking about holy things, and that's a whole other conversation about being impure and touching Torah. But anyway, talking about holy things and holy people and whatever, different congregations are going to have different perspectives on those things. So just make sure you're talking with your leadership about what they consider is appropriate for their congregational environment. Okay, so we will not talk about tithe, which is of course a sanctified monetary system for the Lord. So I have a whole video about that if you want to watch that. Biblical tithe.
Amen. So we just want to thank you for joining this class for this week, and stay tuned for next week. We'll have our final class.
Talk about kosher.
Kashrut.
Things that are fit.
Yes. Amen. And so we invite you back
Not
again.
just about food.
Yeah, it's not just about food. Amen. So we invite you back next week. Until then, we just wish for you to have a Shavua Tov, a good week, and a happy Thanksgiving.